Let's take a look at class example 1, Storms for Africa. I've asked you to prepare a statement of financial position. So this is the first time we're actually going to go and take the information, take all the stuff that we've covered up to now and put it all together and give the users what they're looking for and actually prepare part of the annual financial statements. What is it that you should know before you attempt this question, and what is it that we've covered that you need to know? One, in study unit 1, we spoke about the format of the statement of financial position, and that was right at the end of study unit 1, and I gave you the format of the financial position, or the statement of financial position, and you'll see that it has your assets and your equity and liabilities. So you'll remember that it covers that. Second thing we need to be aware of is our basic accounting equation. And we covered that in study unit 2. We spoke about our basic accounting equation, the fact that assets must always equal equity plus liabilities. The assets that you have, the resources controlled by the entity, the future economic benefits that's coming in, the equity or your net asset value, and the liabilities, the obligations, the present obligations that are going to need to be settled. So we need to be aware of that, and we also need to make sure that we're very comfortable with the fact that these two sides must balance. Your assets must equal your equity and liabilities, and in exams that can always be a little bit tricky, so we want to be very careful and pay attention to the detail here. Number 3, we want to make sure that we're comfortable with the difference between our current and our non-current assets and liabilities. So how do we split our assets and our liabilities up? So in here, we need to split these two between current and non-current, and here we need to split these two between current and non-current as well. So let's take a look at the question and take a look at what it is that I would say you need to start with. The first thing you want to start with in an exam is make sure you get marks. This, in accounting, we are here to pass, we are here to get marks, and I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to help you do that, but you've got to make sure that you follow the processes. You've got to make sure that you get comfortable with it, and you want to make sure that you can start doing it faster. So the earlier you practice, the better. It may feel uncomfortable, you may not necessarily like all the stuff that I'm saying, but it definitely will help you get marks. You're preparing the annual financial statement for Storms for Africa. They have a 28 February 2014 reporting date. They've given you the following information: trade creditors, inventory, machinery, debtors, cash and bank, long-term loan and equity, and you need to prepare the financial position, or the statement of financial position, sorry. Your date, in FAC, we always find out what our client's reporting date is. We always find out what our reporting date is. In this case, yeah, financial year end reporting date, we've got to make sure as at what are we preparing these financial statements at. Our client's name, our company, and you can see your PTY Ltd means it is a company, it is a separate legal entity. So where do we start? We start with our headings. The first thing you write down is your Storms for Africa. Make sure you get the detail right. It's a PTY Ltd, that's your heading. And you are preparing a statement of financial position. Very important now, as at, and my date, 28 February 2014. And this will generally be worth 1 or 2 marks to make sure that you get your headings right. So these headings are worth marks. You want to get them down as fast as possible. So the heading is very important. Make sure you know the name of your company. Make sure you know the reporting date. The next thing is the structure. I want the statement of financial position. The more that you have in your head what this thing is going to look like as a shell, as an empty shell, the easier and the faster this is going to get. So you need to make sure that you're very comfortable with this, that you are very, very good at doing this. You want to be able to do this in your sleep. You want to be able to do this so well. So this is going to require practice. What does your format look like? We have assets, and we have our equity and liabilities. This we know. So these are my headings, my basic structure. Underneath assets, I can have non-current assets, and I can have current assets. Maybe we want to give that a little heading. You can double underline that so you can see it's different. So my assets are going to be made up of non-current assets and current assets. My equity and liabilities, I'm going to start obviously with equity. We don't split that between current and non-current. And we have our non-current liabilities. You can see this does actually take time, so you want to practice this in an exam, and your current liabilities. I don't want to abbreviate what I'm doing here because it gives you a false sense of how long it actually takes to write all these out. So you want to get used to writing these out. Don't abbreviate while you're studying. It's very dangerous because you don't know how much time you're actually going to need in an exam. Okay, so in terms of our basic structure, this is what it's always going to look like. You're going to have your assets, your equity, and your liabilities. Your assets split up between your current and your non-current, your equity, and split up our current and our non-current liabilities as well. If you weren't aware of this, or if you didn't get this basic framework right, if I were you, I'd stop this video right now, go back, do this, write this out, and then go and try and fill in all of these numbers again. If yours didn't look like this and it was a little bit of a mess, go back, do it again, fill it in, and then come start again. And we'll take a look at exactly which numbers go in where. But this basic structure is going to get you marks in an exam, so we want to make sure that you do that. So go back and do that again maybe. All right, let's continue. When we talk about our items in accounting, very important we pay attention to detail. When you look at something, when you deal with something, it's very, very important that you know that you've either put it in the question, you've dealt with it, or you haven't. So make sure you tick little things off or you cross them out so that you can see that you've dealt with them and you don't forget about them or maybe deal with them twice. So let's take a look at the first one. Trade creditors, 14,800. A trade creditor is someone that you owe money for all the stuff that you've done throughout the year. So we owe trade creditors, and this belongs under current liability. We're going to settle it within 12 months. We refer to this as trade and other payables. We all talk about these as very different things. We all talk about these, some people call them creditors, some people call them trade creditors. I could just say it's people I owe money to. IFRS talks about these as trade and other payables. So we make sure that we always use the proper framework and we always use the proper terminology because you're not going to get marks if you don't. So even though they told me in the question that it's trade creditors, I need to make sure that when I report on it properly, which is to say trade and other payables. 14,800, and once I fill that in, I can cross that out. So I've got 14,800 over there. The next one I need is my inventory. Inventory is a stock that you have on hand. That is an asset. It's going to be worth money to you, and you're going to realize that within 12 months. So that goes underneath your current assets. And we had 10,000 rands worth of inventory. Let's make sure that we line this up with our other number so it makes life easier for us. 10,000 rand, and we can cross that off. Our machinery is what we use to manufacture our items. So when we look at machinery and the stuff that our company uses in the manufacture, we have machinery, we've got a whole bunch of equipment, we may have vehicles, we've got property that we own. We don't separately identify all this in the financial statements because you can imagine how long these get. We add it all up together and we put it underneath what we call property, plant, and equipment. And when we talk about plant in accounting, we don't mean the plants outside, we mean the machinery, the equipment in the factory and that type of thing. So plant is not about the plants outside. And you'll very often hear accountants and a lot of people, and we'll probably do it quite a lot, we always talk about PPE. It's the short version of property, plant, and equipment. In exam, you never abbreviate when you're writing stuff in exam. Very dangerous. So our machinery is 102,000. Let's write that down, move on. Our debtors are people that owe us money. We sold stuff to them and they're going to say they're going to pay us later. We hope they pay us within 12 months. These are our current assets. Just the same as creditors, we need to be careful. We call creditors trade and other payables. Our debtors are called trade and other receivables. Receivable meaning purely you expect to actually receive this money, and your debtors 15,500. And you're going to get used to these terms as we go, so don't worry if there's just too many things going on. The more that you use it, the more you practice it, the better it's going to get. Cash and bank, the amount of money that you have on hand, the amount of money you have in your bank account. It is instantly available to you, and we call it cash and cash equivalents. Anything that is cash or like cash, oops, cash and cash equivalents is 4,800. We've dealt with that. Your long-term loan, long-term means that it's longer than 1 year, so that's non-current. So we have a long-term loan, and that was for 80,000. Again, 80,000 over here. Equity, your net asset value, what is your owner's portion of the business? 37,500. Again, we don't split that between current and non-current. And now when we look at it, we've dealt with all of our numbers. Just give it a little bit of a scan once you've done to make sure that you haven't left anything off, because you don't want to lose marks. In accounting, whenever you're dealing with figures, you're dealing with numbers, we give subtotals as far as possible. You can imagine if we're dealing with long lists of numbers, you want to make sure that you give subtotals all along the way. So for each one of these headings, you give a little subtotal. Even if there is just one item in the category, please make sure you do that. It creates a habit, obviously, and it is how things need to be prepared. Just because there's only one item in the category doesn't mean it doesn't get a subtotal. So that's 102,000, nice and easy. Make sure you get the marks. Your current assets need to be added up. So your inventory plus your trade and other receivables plus your cash and cash equivalents is going to give you 30,300. And that means that my total assets, my non-current plus my current, is going to give me 132,300. My equity and liabilities, again, just because there's one item doesn't mean it doesn't get a subtotal, 37,500. My non-current liabilities, my long-term loan, 80,000. Let's give that a little subtotal. My trade and other payables, 14,800. Now, moment of truth. Does our equity and liabilities give us our assets? 37,500 plus 80 plus 14,800 gives us 132,300. And hey presto, we're in luck. It does actually balance. In an exam, if it doesn't balance, please don't freak out. If you have time, go back and take a look at it again. At the moment, the most important thing I want out of this from you is a basic structure that we can start filling in. We're going to go through a lot of detail. We've got a lot more coming up, but this means that as of now, you can get marks in an exam. You're going to be getting marks for the way that you disclose this. You're going to be getting marks for adding these up, for putting them in the right places. This thing is just worth loads of marks. Go back, get your formats right, get your understanding right, and this is going to become a lot easier over time. I promise it will be better when you practice it a little bit more.